Buenas tardes a todos, un gusto.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure. My name is Jean-Luc. We're going to have a very interesting panel today about conflict resolution mechanisms in the region, a topic that keeps getting more important in this perfectioning that is happening in the PPPs, and particularly to strengthen the framework in general and to ensure that the projects are developed efficiently with continuity and quality for public services. We have here today excellent panelists with a great knowledge and experience in these matters with arbitration, resolution, technical panels, and specialists in regulatory affairs as well. So we're gonna welcome Jaime Lee, leader in structuration and management of PPPs, with a specialist focus in conflict resolution. He's co-chair of the Latin American section of the World Association of PPP Units of Professionals. In, in Peru, he has worked in contractual strategies in different infrastructure projects in Peru and the region, and his experience is key to understand the mechanisms of resolution and how they can contribute to the stability of PPPs in the region. Our next panelist is Marianela Ventura. She is a well-known expert in arbitration and conflict resolution from her role as the General Secretary from the Commerce Chamber of Lima. She has played a key role in the development of arbitration processes in Peru, and she contributes to the consolidation of mechanisms for the conflict resolution. Her experience is going to be key to analyze challenges and opportunities in arbitration in the management of corporation disputes. So thank you for your presence, Marianela. And also we have Aldo Gonzalez. He's an associate professor and economy researcher with a career in regulation and analysis of infrastructure contracts. He is also a member of the technical panel of concessions of public works in Chile with a wide experience in this kind of activities. He has developed studies regarding risk management in PPPs and the mechanisms for conflict resolution in this kind of projects. And his experience is going to be key to understanding economic impact in this kind of conflicts and how their management can reduce costs and times in the contracts. And finally, we are going to welcome Justino de Oliveira, who is well-known in administrative law and conflict resolution in infrastructure contracts. He's a professor of the University of Sao Paulo, and he has advised the government in the structured framework of PPPs in conflict resolution. His vision is going to be crucial to analyze the role of legal frameworks in the stability of contracts and the balance between public and private interests. Thank you so much, Justino, and thank you all for being here today. So here a little bit, so to start, the region has had, well, fundamental issues. We have the closing of gaps in infrastructure, and we know that the PPPs have become part of the solution to close those gaps, and the contracts have been perfectionating. We know that there's a lot of efforts in terms of drafting the clauses and try to advance and obtain a better vision in terms of future conflicts and how they can be generated. We know that there's social benefits, so that the attempt to generate those social benefits need to lead these infrastructure challenges. As a bank, we're working with several of sort of people, some of them we have here today, in promoting those lessons learned in the region. Try to get a common understanding, particularly from the countries that have advanced more, that are sort of heading PPPs, such as Brazil, Chile, and Peru, actually, to understand how those schemes can be improved and make the contracts more efficient. Try to avoid the judicialization of each one of the conflicts that may arise between the public and private sector. So those exchanges have become more and more important. We are supporting also the government of Peru in the implementation of 2 pilot projects for the management and overseeing of projects of PPPs in infrastructure, electricity and sanitation, that are two sectors that have had important issues in disputes, and we they have been gaining more weight in terms of disputes resolution in the region. Also, as a bank, we are in the next few months we are going to be working in publishing a document that is going to gather those lessons learned, and is going to try to promote good practices to be implemented in the region, trying to harmonize those rules, those ways to resolve issues in the PPPP contracts for the common good. In this context, we're going to want to talk about success cases and the implementation of strategies for a dispute resolution, the impact that a legal framework may have in terms of risk mitigation in PPP contracts, better practices to make arbitration and resolution processes more agile, and we're going to try and talk about the main challenges and opportunities that the PPPs face in conflict resolution. With this, I wanted to start with you, Jaime. A question about your experience in the structuration of PPPs. What do you consider are the main risk factors that may derive in conflicts in these contracts? And what strategies may be adopted from the design of contracts in order to mitigate them? Okay, thank you. I want to apologize for my voice. I have a sore throat. So the main risks that have been identified throughout the years in my experience are several. They happen in the constructive phase and the end of the project. So the whole cycle of the PPP project. As any project, and during the life cycle, it presents or it has risks, but the usual ones are, for example, risks in terms of the availability of land. That's the more usual. So the government, in their political will to get projects, they assign the projects, but they don't have the availability of the land. Therefore, projects are delayed, and we have had several experiences executing works that have been delayed due to that. So good practices say that the normal is that you need to assign the project at least with 50% of the land, if not 100, so that you just leave a gap to the investor in order for them to comply with the schedule, and the government keeps getting the land with expropriations. We know that the expropriation process may last. In other contracts in Central America, the investor is given the risk of buying the land, or in the last case, the government does it. But of course, that makes the project more expensive. Another risk that usually happen, and it's normal, is constructive risk. Since we're talking about complex engineering projects, it may happen that during the execution of the projects there may be technological changes or design changes that are necessary in order for the project to move forward due to some inconveniences, unforeseen inconveniences that happen during the execution. So what is needed here is the establishment of contract modification mechanisms in the technical level so that the contracts are not paralyzed. What usually happens is that a PPP contract is usually affected in the constructed phase. There's a conflict, there's no agreement, you go to arbitration, and it's paralyzed for 2-3 years. You have 3 arbitration processes, it's a cost for the government, the project value financially is affected, and when you resolved it, the project is no longer updated. So a mechanism that helps with this is the Board of Resolution of Disputes, which is in the Peruvian regulations. It helps the projects be more agile in order not to paralyze the constructive phase. Another risk that I usually see is the regulatory political issue. Since we're talking about projects that are affected by regulatory changes due to not being a completely private project, but it's a project where the private is executing works for the state, it's going to be affected by changes in regulation. And therefore, we need to establish contractual clauses that allow the adaptation of the contract to these changes. And if these changes generate overcosts in the contract, to be able to reestablish the balance, the economical financial balance. Otherwise, you're going to have contracts that are not updated according to regulations, and that may affect the proper development of the public service. Something that I've also seen in some countries in Central America is that since these are long-term contracts, we should not see as a bad thing that these addendums may happen. There are going to be contractual changes. These are public services, and these are going to be changing according to the needs of the service. It's not just the projections of the demand that are going to be calculated. So therefore, the contract needs to be able to be sustainable and adapt to the changes of demand, establishing change mechanisms that are agile for the contracts. So lastly, connected with technical issues, I also see geotechnical risks that we usually see here in some of these countries because we have a variety or a history from the pre-colony times. So in this case, it's advisable that based on the theory that PPPs assign risk to the one that is in the best position to assume it, the geotechnical, geological risk or archaeological risk doesn't necessarily need to be assigned to the private party. There are technical aspects or studies that may not be as accurate because maybe the conditions don't allow it, and you are assigning too much risk to the private party. Therefore, there are some risks in this nature that need to be assumed by both parties. For example, in Peru, literally you lift a rock and you find a waka, you find a temple. And who's going to assume that? You cannot just leave the private party with that unknown risk. You might find a very old archaeological finding and the project is paralyzed. So all of this in the end is also reflected obviously within the cooperative phase with which the project needs to incorporate the principle of sustainability that the IDB promotes in order for the project to adapt to these climate changes that are maybe predictable, we can say, and that makes the infrastructure to be even present in the moments that it is needed the most. So I think that that is sort of a summary, and actually something that is very important that I was missing. The projects, since these are public services, they have a very important thing regarding the stakeholders. There's always going to be internal, external stakeholders of the public entities and the citizens. So a very important tool that the government needs to have, for me, is activities of identification, prioritization, classification, a plan for communications, overseeing, and a constant planification of the stakeholders that may affect the continuity of the project. Because your project may be perfect, but if the community does not agree, or the political agents do not agree, you may have some hurdles that may affect the bankability and the sustainability of it. So there is an effort that the government does not have to do only the first year, but throughout the whole life cycle of the project. That's it. Thank you, Jaime. That is quite comprehensive. Marianela, we're going to continue with you. So,
So there are different solutions that exist in the contracts, in the technical panels, of course. First, those are the first order. But if the problems are still there, we end up in an arbitration. I wanted to listen from you. What trends have you found in terms of using arbitration in order to solve disputes, and what do you consider essential in order for this to be efficient? Well, thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Well, in general, I think that we're being more aware from the different fronts from which we fight in order to have a regulation framework, to have legal security, and this is taken by the state, by the private companies as founders, and of course the members of the legal community, legal the members of the arbitration centers, and this importance of the legal security in order to create trust and attract investments. This is something that we see in the normative regulations with clear rules, with not arbitrary changes. We also see the regulation simplification, the deregularization, the previsibility, how the rules are being applied, so they can generate trust, and also the access to ownership, so that everyone can have access to this ownership on time in a fair way, taking into account the respect to the legal framework, as well as paying attention to what we're trying to solve within this legal framework. Sorry, I'm talking about, for example, when you're part of an arbitration, we have to trust the legitimacy of it, and we have to look forward to a favorable result, and we don't have to look for the best result no matter what, right? And also during the procedures and the internal processes. This all makes arbitration not be taken as a complementary element, but is a key piece for the PPP projects, as mentioned previously, characterized by the long term, the complexity, and a high financial impact. From the beginning, arbitration has been incorporated as this key element for legal protection, especially within this context. For example, in Peru, the reliability of trust is limited, so most PPP contracts have this direct um, consultation first, and then we have these um, arrangements at an international level. With this procedural architecture, which is still um, working within this legal document 1362. So for the PPP contracts, we still have the arbitrary clauses, and this is a strategic that it has specific strategies for the operators. For the elaboration of these contracts, this is very long, extensive, plus all the stages. We have a lot of problems if we don't get to solve the issues in the prior stages, and we get to the arbitration. And the arbitration is an ideal mechanism because it is fast, and we have the expertise from the people that are part of it. And from this experience, I consider that we can take some actions in order to strengthen even more these mechanisms. So first, as we always see the controversies in terms of PPP contracts that are getting more complex every time, and I consider that we should look for these arbitration agents that have the multidisciplinary expertise, so that they can understand and solve these controversies with the same logic from an APPP, right? So you need to have experience in PPP, and of course the application of international standards in terms of ethics. This is vital. This is vital so that we can have more efficiency and legitimacy. In terms of transparency, all the arbitration centers have to look for tools so that we can generate trust about our job in our clients, which who are our users. From my experience in the arbitration center of the Chamber of Commerce in Lima, we have a very strong tool, which is the transparency light. This is something you can find in the web page, free for free, and you can find useful information about the performance of the arbitrator in our centers. So our center has 32 years of experience offering arbitration. We have had over 8,000 arbitrations. We have 800 arbitrations at the time. So we have a lot of experience. And so we have collected the data and we have made this transparent. You know, the arbitrations are private, but not the performance of the arbitrators. So with for this project, we are publishing, for example, how many arbitrations have the arbitrators have had, if they have had arbitrations that have been archived by the legal power institutions, everything that had to do with the case that is open source. And another important measure in which we find like a bottleneck is the execution of the different elements. Of course, with the arbitrators, we try to solve the disputes as soon as possible. We're very aware of the consequences of the arbitrations taking too long. But we have this bottleneck once a part has a condition that is not in favor of the state, because it takes a lot of time. The execution, the mechanisms are weak. So we believe that it's important to modify this budget regulations so that we can make this easier and more efficient. And also, aside from arbitration, it's really important, as Jaime mentioned previously, the promotion or development of the prior mechanisms to the arbitration. Because, I mean, we have what is correct, but there are many things that could have been solved previously with dispute boards, for example. And this is a service that we also offer at the center. And with this, we can solve the controversies that may arise without stopping the execution of the projects, the works. So this is a mechanism that we need to develop further in Peru. And of course, this has to do with training of everyone that is involved. And from the center, we believe in this. There are things that could be solved with dispute boards, and if we need to get to the arbitration, okay, we'll go to it, and we will try to give the best service possible. Thank you very much, Marianela. Very interesting. So we're going to continue with Aldo, and Aldo is going to talk about this from the economic perspective. How does the conflict impact in the finance viability of the projects, and what are the best practices in order to minimize these impacts? Perfect. Good afternoon. Yes, okay. The impact of the conflict resolution mechanism in the viability of the project and the investment attractions is direct. What the investors want is the guarantee of fair treatment, and that we execute the contracts. And we have to take into account that we're talking about these long-term contracts, 20 or 30 years. So, for example, first we can have a government that is a friend of these projects, but this could change in 2 or 3 years. So we have to treat this from the justice point of view. we need to have the rule of law. It has to be stable. And there's another dimension in regards to the selection of companies. We call this adverse selection. The conflict resolution dispute mechanism is not about getting these fearful contracts and then having abuse of litigation. For example, we can have a very efficient company and they can offer a specific price, and we can have another one that is not as efficient. I'm going to uh, lower the price, and then we're going to negotiate this. I'll go to the dispute board and I'll win. So that's another kind of investment that you may attract. In regards to the recommendations, I'm going to give you some about the chilling experience from the dispute resolution um, perspective. In 2006, we have these disputes that then became arbitrations, and we had to create a permanent panel, which is some kind of dispute boards that issue recommendations in the first place. What are the recommendations there? It needs to provide with security. I'm not a lawyer, but I understand that this is the right application of the law and the contract. What does the law say? What was offered? Secondly, this should be treated by something that is an expert, that is competitive, that knows the topic from the legal perspective, the engineering perspective, that knows the constructions, the works, that knows the details, and also people that is familiar to the economic matters, because this is a very important issue when trying to solve disputes. That's the second recommendation. The third one is the opportunity. This has to be solved fast. The problems are, for example, that it takes a lot of time because there are a lot of causes. We need to have a panel or institution that are focusing on this specifically so that they can work on this and solve this on the proper time. And how do we materialize this? Here are some recommendations that come from the Chilean experience, and these are things that could be discussed at, at present. But first, the appointment of the members of the panel have to guarantee that we have ideal people, and they shouldn't represent the parts. They shouldn't feel that they are here because the government put them there or the companies put them there. They have to apply the concessionary um, conditions, and it shouldn't be in favor of the government or the concessionaire. And with this, we should have some kind of competition so that they are part of the institutionality. They are not representing one of the parts. The second, another element that we have seen that it has been positive, the panels have to be permanent, whether it's within the same contract a long time or through many contracts. Why does this design have an advantage? I will say that it's because it generates accountability, and this creates jurisprudence, which brings stability. When the panel starts failing in regards to how they have initiated their recommendations, the agents, the concessionaires, they know how they are going to solve the panel in that way, and it's very difficult to change something unless you have a very good reason. So it's important to have this permanent character or permanent characteristic, because this provides us with accountability and repetition. And the third point has to do with the binding link to these situations. Here we have several options. We have the dispute board that is providing us with a recommendation that cannot be taken into account by the parts. Ideally, this will happen in fast, but when we have these other situations, we require more times because we need more time to collect the evidences. In Chile, for example, the decisions can be made afterwards. And of course, here we have a doubt about what is what is the best thing to do. If we have to have an appealing to a justice system, or this is something that we should pay more attention to. But the most important thing is that we can have their solutions on time, so the contract does not stop, the work does not stop, and they can continue with the project.
Aldo.
Thank you so much, Aldo. Thank you for such a clear explanation. Now, Justino, we're going to start with you. I wanted to ask you, what lessons can we learn from the regulation in different countries in order to strengthen the conflict resolution in PPPs, and what regulatory adjustments would be key for Latin America? Well, thank you so much, Dennis. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, I'm going to talk about the dispute boards. These dispute boards as specific mechanisms to prevent, disputes in PPPs. So I wanted to highlight 4 levels. The first one, the contractual level. Then I'm gonna be talking about the regulatory or legal level. Then the cultural level of the culture of management of the PPPs in a country. And then lastly, the level of the PPP projects. So to start, in the contractual level, it is important to say that the boards are consensual and contractual ways foreseen in a clause of the contract chosen by the parties to prevent and resolve conflicts. That is very important. So therefore, the boards are governance instances for the PPPs, and they need to be structured within the contract with the participation of experts that have the trust of the parties and that are going to recommend or decide regarding conflicts and contractual disputes. So this is very important because when the boards are going to act a decision, the more relevant thing is what kind of conflict are the boards going to be acting on. So we may have conflicts regarding interpretation of the clauses. We may have technical conflicts that may have to do with a project, for example. We may have conflicts or disputes that are legal, right? So it's a little bit more complex. And we may have conflicts that are financial or economic financial conflicts. So the parts are going to choose that. So that is very important. And this way, the parts need to understand the purpose of the boards, and therefore they need to respect their recommendations and their decisions. That is also very relevant. Second, in the legal regulatory level, it's not mandatory to have a specific law regarding the boards, but it is recommended to have it in order to provide more legal security, to have a general regulatory provision. Like in Brazil, we have special laws regarding boards in a local and regional level. We don't have a national law regarding the boards yet. Also, general provisions, explicit ones, and we do have that in Brazil and also here in Peru. We have the auction law for public contracts. There is a provision in a more explicit regulation for the boards in the new public procurement law. And in Brazil, there is a wave that is sort of starting that is a little bit different. We also have special regulations for certain infrastructure fields or sectors. So these are very specific regulations for the boards that are going to be acting on these concession contracts and PPPs. For example, the Resolution 6040 of 2024 of the regulatory body of national regulatory body for transportation in Brazil that has to do with PPP concessions of highways and railroads. And so we may have these very specific recommendations regarding boards and these contracts, PPP contracts. Well, at a cultural level, the PPP management culture is very important. We need to say that. We do have standards, guidelines, global ones for the boards. For example, the contracts and fatigue or clauses for constructions. But the dispute resolution clauses for the PPP need to reflect the way in which the PPP management happens in a country. So I think that this is very valuable, and that is exactly what we did here in Peru with the IDB Pro Inversión and our Brazilian office last year for the new PPPs for the sanitation infrastructure construction and also for operation and maintenance of water treatment plants here in Peru. So we prepared a minute of standard clause that may be used in these contracts. But it was very important to know the culture of management of PPPs here in Peru in order to draft this minute. And why is this so important? Well, what we're going to be looking for, we need to look for the effectivity or the enforcement of the recommendations of the boards and also the decisions of the boards, right? It has to do with the management of the contracts. And lastly, Denise, at a level of projects, of PPP projects, two main points here. So we need to ask ourselves, for example, what kind of projects or which kind of projects the boards are going to be happening. So these are greenfield projects, these are brownfield projects, these are dayfield projects, and that is important. Then the boards are going to be applied in which cycles or moments of the PPPs. The design, I don't think, is um, a proper moment for the boards to act. The construction, I think it is. The operation and the maintenance as well is important. So those are the things that I wanted to mention, Denise. And then we can talk about the experience here in Peru and in Brazil. Thank you so much, Justino. Excellent. So I think I'm looking at the time. We still have an opportunity to talk a little bit more. And I wanted to ask you an additional question to each one of you. Maybe for a more of an executive answer, but it'd be interesting to hear your point of view and from your professional perspective. So for you, if you need to mention one, what is the main challenge that all of those dispute resolution mechanisms for PPPs would face in the next years, and what strategy or strategies do you consider are key to strengthen those mechanisms? Same order. Well, from my own perspective as a lawyer, the crucial challenge is legal security or judicial security. So the mechanisms for dispute resolution that you develop, even if being JRD or arbitration, even if they are within the regulation, the government needs to provide the legal security that the resolution, the response or the decision of that mechanism is going to be respected. Because even though you may have a law and a mechanism and it may be applied, the decision in the use imperium power, they're not interested. If the government is not interested in respecting it, then it makes no sense. So they need to give you they need to make sure that that they are gonna be providing that legal security to resolve a project that they are interested in to have it resolved within the conditions that were agreed upon in the contract. So I agree. And additionally, I think that in order to strengthen the system of dispute resolution in the PPP framework, we have the strengthening or the further specialization of the operators and the agents that are going to operate in the field of the arbitrations, for example, more specialization, particularly in multidisciplinary matters, more coordination also between the government officials, the ones that are working in execution and then are going to be working with the legal defense also. And then the use of clauses of arbitration that leverages the flexibility that they may have that are designed in a specific way for a specific project, that they leverage the possibility of customizing to the project and the needs of the parties. Yeah. So I would say the specialization, as you just mentioned, in terms of having or creating these bodies that resolve these matters and that are specialized in PPPs. These are construction projects of big works. There is a big volume of works that are going to be using more and more these mechanisms, and the investors are looking for a legal security. So it is important to have, I don't know if arbitrators or experts, how to call it, that are multidisciplinary. They come from different disciplines that are related to the matters. You know, of course, lawyers, engineers, economists, and financial experts. It is important to have a swift resolution. There's always a trade-off, right? As the economists say, we want a good application of justice. Sometimes you need more time. But on the other hand, long times into delay introduce a lot of transaction problems in the contractual management, and also foreseeability, previsibility, to be able to know how similar matters are resolved so that the agents can know what they're facing and how they're going to face certain matters when they want to present them. What you may say, the better arbitration body is the one that doesn't know any cases because everybody already anticipates how it's going to be resolved. So that is my answer. Okay, so for me, the main challenge is to make the boards better known by everybody. That's what we're doing. We're talking about the boards, the roles, their impacts, positive impacts in the execution of the PPPs. For example, we have very relevant results of a recent research of King's College from December 2024 regarding the benefits of the boards for the mid and long-term contracts in the world. So the issue, or one of the issues regarding the boards, which is why they're not very well known, is that there wasn't, or there's no, we have a little bit more now, but I mean data, specific data about the boards. And this recent research from King's College, for example, or from this research, we can understand that the boards are an excellent mean for the prevention and resolution of disputes with a decision power and with a very low cost compared to arbitrations, which are more expensive. For example, in this research, the mean cost of the boards is 0 to 0.1% of the total value of the project. So it's not as expensive as an arbitration. That is one point. Then another thing is that we have a challenge here. We need to understand the roles of the boards. Compared to the arbitration, the boards may be a mean of prevention for the arbitrations. So we can think about it this way. We have technical conflicts. We direct them to the boards. Um, Conflicts regarding clause interpretation also. Then economical conflicts. Sometimes the boards may be better for that as well. Maybe political conflicts that have to do with clause interpretations, but legal things that are more complex. That may be something more for an arbitration. So we can also make these decisions. And as a strategy, I was here thinking, for example, the use of the boards in PPP contracts with the use of a standard clause for conflict resolution. So we need to think about specific clauses for the boards for these contract models. So that is specifically what we did here in Peru with Pro Inversión for these new PPPs for sanitation infrastructure. We worked for about a year and a half, and now we do have those standard clause minus that are going to be used in the next ones. So there's a big expectation to see if those clauses had an impact in the execution of those contracts. Also, trainings are important. Trainings for the public part of the contract, also the private part. So trainings are also always important. And as I was saying here, the continuous monitoring of the results and the impacts of the recommendations and of the decisions of the boards in the life of the contracts. That is also very important to create information. So that's it. Thank you, Justino. I think that with this, we have finished the questions. The answers were quite interesting. Thank you so much for your inputs. I wanted to leave some takeaways. May I ask a question? In the end. In the end, okay? Yeah, we still have a little bit of time for questions. So, basically, we have talked about two types of dispute resolution mechanisms, technical panels and arbitration. Being the technical panels, the first solution, they aim for a technical focus, a swift or rapid resolution to the conflicts that may arise. We have seen that basically they allow to reduce risks and avoid long litigations, and they ensure an effective execution of the projects, looking for the continuity of the project, efficiency of the continuity of the contract as you resolve the problems in parallel. So, landing these technical panels, we've seen with Aldo that there are different modalities. There's decisions that have a binding nature and non-binding as well. The binding ones are more complex at a legal level. Within the countries, they're less accepted, even though they are a very important element. And we've seen that in the technical panels may be permanent or ad hoc. The permanent nature of those panels may bring an important element, which in a way is to provide predictability as to how the problems are going to resolve throughout the life of the contract. We know that these are 20, 30-year contracts, and providing that certainty to the market can help with the tendering phase. And also, once the actors know how it works, they are going to go directly to the crucial point of the problem, and they're going to try to resolve it. So that is sort of an ideal way to see things. What do these mechanisms depend on? Obviously, contractual clarity, as we've seen, directly in the structuration of the contract is key to have those clauses that allow to have a certain predictability as to how things are going to be working, what the rules are, and this goes with regulatory frameworks, as Justino was saying. In order to strengthen all of these mechanisms, we think that it is crucial definitely to have a preventative focus. that these clauses are very well structured, that we have risk management tools in the very initial phases of the project, and particularly we have talked about this as well, training elements in the private and the public sectors for a better understanding of how all of this works, and again to make decisions more agile and not stop the contract. Finally, this goes alongside the harmonization of the regulation regionally, that it is a work that is being carried out in these matters, bringing those good practices that are more advanced in certain countries and bringing them to other countries that could have a margin for improvement in those aspects. And finally, to try to reduce in every way the judicialization of the conflicts, which is very expensive and it stops the projects and doesn't allow to have a high level of quality in the delivery of the public service. So with this, I'm going to finish. I wanted to thank the panelists again. So I see that we have a full room. Thank you so much for participating. And so there were some questions. I don't know if the panelists agree to receive some questions. We still have 3 minutes.
Well, congratulations for the panel. It's really a very important topic in Latin America and the region. I have written a theory and I wanted to know if you share this. Within the good practice in terms of contracts management, which is a topic that is set aside in the region, which includes the proactive management of disputes, we had the opportunity to study the Colombia case and how this relationship management and dispute management has been working lately, and had the sensation, I had the sense that from the point of view of the good practices from Australia and other countries, from the formal dispute point of view, which for us will be like entering the panel because there is like a third part that is going to intervene and is going to help us solve the dispute. Will be an issue that hasn't been solved. So the best practices at an international level go through this with a completely different approach from the traditional approach, which is the collaborative approach. And it's always said about these good practices that you, as the public part, usually don't appeal so easily to the literacy of the contract, except when you don't have any other remedy. So before appealing to the panel directly, we need to have proof that we have had a tactical meeting, and if this fails, another meeting. So we should want to try to solve this in a friendly way directly. So what happened in Colombia? We found the abuse of appealing directly to these panels. And I think this is an endemic problem in Latin America because nobody wants to assume the responsibility of reaching a direct agreement because it's a legal practice and it's a common practice to uh, not take the fault. And this is something that really scares me. It happened that a Spanish company was suffering some penalties, and they are still waiting for a solution because they were not complying with the KPI. The tunnel had to have three operational fans, and they got a penalty, and then another one, and then another one. But what's the problem? That there wasn't a tunnel, but this wasn't modified in the literacy of the contract. They didn't modify that there shouldn't be a tunnel, and I think this is um, very difficult. We should take this into account. We have, for example, if you say okay, there's no tunnel, but I'm applying the checklist, and the checklist says that there aren't funds. And if we don't have funds, it doesn't matter if you have a tunnel or not. The thing is that you're going to get a penalty. So, can we apply this to Peru, to Chile, to Brazil? This cultural element that we go to literacy, that we want to interpret these contract in this way instead of being having common sense. From my experience, when I was part of the Ministry of Transport, many officers have this public chip. So this is related to the this happens in every company, and the officer is afraid of applying innovation because the company is going to say this is not specified in the contract, and that is why they are scared. At least in the Peruvian regulations in 2019, we incorporated the approach based on results. So when we have two solutions that are legally valid, we promote the ones that works better with the contract. So, for example, now you say this literally says this, but if I take this way, this is going to benefit the contract. You can find this in the PPP law, the principle of approach based on results. With this, we have been able to promote projects and tell the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, okay, now we have this, and this doesn't affect the economic balance. This complies with the KPIs and with everything. But this is a matter of fear from the public officers because these projects are very costly, and the regulations have to support the concessionaires because this is not a public contract. Does anyone want to add something? Yes, this makes a lot of sense. I thought this happened in Chile. So we see, yes, mm, but it doesn't make us feel that better. But I will say that these panels have a role of using, like, like trying to find things or trying to interpret things in a certain way. They can treat this personally. If you go to the panel, if the panel says yes, perfect. So within this imperfection, this seems like a bad solution given the problem, but the ideal thing would be that we will solve this with common sense. But our legal logics is working like this. Yes, it's like a second best. Well, another point that I thought was really important, what was really interesting about this question is that we cannot transform the boards in legal procedures because the boards can, I mean, the experts, the members, and the ones that are part of the boards can have and can stop, can have the ability to solve conflicts, how they can support the parts in order to have this dialogue, to try to have this self composition. So we have to validate this. The boards could be more collaborative. The recommendation is to have these instances in order to make decisions. So we have more collaboration when we have the support of the members of the companies. And one last thing that I think is very important, when we have lawyers involved in the processes, the the lawyers transform these processes. So we have to have some regulations. It's important to have these guidelines for questions. For example, these are very important. So that we can say, no, this is not an arbitration. This is not the judiciary. It's important that the parts have the opportunity to speak with the members of the panel, the board. I'm a lawyer. This is important. I know exactly what happens. So we have to be able to transform the boards into these agencies that can collaborate with both parts and create this collaboration. Just to complement briefly what Jusino mentioned, of course, I don't have the specific information about these boards in PPP, but at an international level, they are really efficient. I mean, 98% of the cases that you see in the dispute boards do not become arbitration. So this is very interesting. Now, in regards to what Jaime said from about Peru, it's very interesting, and this has to do with the negotiation. In Peru, we don't have this, but I do know that in Ecuador, for example, there is a public part, and the public officer has this support from the regulations. For example, they have a different chip. If there is something that could have been solved previously, for example, during negotiation, prior to the arbitration, they could prefer to take responsibility. I know this approach exists. I haven't studied this, but this happens in Ecuador. It will be interesting if we could extrapolate a part of the regulations or the guidelines. Well, thank you very much. It was a very complete answer. With this, we're going to finish. We're going to take a final picture with the panelists. And with this, we're going to finish. Thank you very much.